I recently posted a video about Asahi Super Dry, and I essentially said that out of all the global macro lagers, this is one of my favorite. I got a comment on the YouTube video version, and it was essentially along the lines of this: I don't find this beer inspiring, this international lager thing, like it's not really drinkable, all this kind of thing. That's a valid point in terms of if you're looking at it in comparison to, say, your German Munich breweries, Augustiner, or your Czech breweries, or even kind of locally produced craft lagers. They are much better to drink, and I enjoy them more than I do a macro lager. But I think there's different tiers in terms of macro lager, and I think Asahi is one of those beers on a higher tier than some of the others. And I think this has a lot to do with their expertise in their process. And Asahi as a beer is quite impressive in terms of how they managed to get that beautiful, subtle sweetness in the beginning, rolling into a drying finish, and the peppery hop bitterness, comparing that to your Carlsberg, Carling, Madri. For me, this sits above it. And I would choose it at a macro pub unless it was competing with something like Budvar or Paulaner or something like that. I think Asahi's on that level, kind of huge factory level breweries that are doing all sorts of time and cost cutting, that you can really taste that in the beer. And that's the kind of macro level international lager that I just really cannot drink. I cannot, I don't enjoy them. They taste chemically, they taste weak. There's nothing about them that impresses me. Whereas Asahi, yes, they're all over the world and they are a macro beer, but I still feel like they retain that kind of expertise and kind of premium flavor to it, even though it doesn't quite hit the levels of your German breweries. It's still respectable as a macro beer because there's all sorts of things you have to think about on a giant global scale of producing beer. You don't have to worry about if you're just regionally producing or much smaller, in terms of your ingredients, your process, how long it takes for beer to get around the world, pasteurization. All of this stuff is a headache for a macro brewer. That's why so many of them make huge cost cutting measures and sacrifice flavor and mouthfeel and blah, blah, blah to produce a beer that is like kind of good enough, that, and then they can market the rest to you and people will drink it. And that, for me, that's like Madri. Madri is like marketed as a Spanish lager, even though it's brewed in England, and it's basically just tastes like Carlsberg. Whereas Asahi, I feel, is slightly better than that. But it's an interesting discussion point: macro versus craft, and what's worth drinking and what's worth talking about.